Hi, I'm Greg, and today on Build It University we're going to be building a raised flower bed garden planter for flowers, or if you want to grow vegetables in it. It's lined with a polyethylene drum so that it's not going to rot the wood, and it's going to last a long time. So let's have a look.
Don't attempt to cut a barrel in half that has had flammable liquids inside. It could cause an explosion and injury.
So to get started with the barrel liner for the planter, I measured across the top and I measured the height of the barrel so that I know what measurements I'm going to use on my planter frame. I also chalked a chalk line down the seam of the barrel so it's easier to see, and now I'm going to take the Sawzall and cut it in half.
It's fairly easy to find these polyethylene drums in the buy and sell and stuff like that online. But what you want to do if you're going to grow vegetables in this planter, try and find a source that was food grade. So anything that was storing food ingredients. Some of the ones I've found have been for vinegar and syrups and stuff like that. So if you're just growing flowers, it doesn't matter very much, but I just think it's better if you try and find food grade, because sometime down the road you might decide to grow something edible in the container.
Now that the barrel's cut in half, we can continue on making the frame to surround it, and this is going to make a medium-sized planter. We also do ones cut in half the opposite way to make a small-sized planter, and there's another way to do this where you can make a planter twice as long, but for now we're just going to cover the medium size. And so let's go cut the framework.
So the first batch of parts we're going to make for this planter are the legs. This is going to be countertop height. It's going to go beside a barbecue for an herb garden. So you can make them whatever height you want. It's basically what makes it easy for you to work on. So if you're just going to use it for a patio set, you might want a coffee table height. But if you're growing food in it and you don't want to bend too much, you can raise the height so it's easier to work on. So the next thing to do after the legs is the barrel frames. These cover the barrel on the outside, so it doesn't really matter that much what color of barrel that you end up getting. The outside is going to be covered in wood, the inside is going to be covered with dirt, but this is going to hold the legs, this is going to hold the top frame, and this is going to hold the barrel support frame. So this is like the main structure of the planter. Once we finish cutting the barrel frames, then we have to make a barrel support, and that's going to go on the bottom to hold the extra weight of the dirt, keep that barrel from sagging. So most of the wood in this project is pressure treated, and when you cut it to length, you're exposing the ends. So you want to re-treat those with the end cut treatment, and it's going to give you the same color as how it showed up from the factory, but also it's going to seal it up so it doesn't rot. And if this is going to go outside on the ground instead of on a deck or a patio, you're going to want to put some stones or bricks or even some blocks of wood underneath the leg that's would be touching the ground, because you don't want that connection from the ground directly to the end grain on the lumber, because that's what soaks up the water the most, is the end grain. The screws are really close to the edge, so we need to pre-drill so that we don't get any cracking. They're a 3.5 inch screw going from the sides into the end boards. So we want to mark those out. They're about 1.5 inches away from the top and bottom of the board, and about 3/4 of an inch away from the edge. And that's going to stop everything from cracking once we drill those screws. Because of the wind and the traffic today, I had to voice over all of the audio on the video here because it was just constant wind coming through. But the weather was good, so I thought I better get the video done. It's about a month ahead of gardening season right now, but usually I get a few orders of these planters before the May long weekend, and so I thought I'd better get a head start. The main fasteners we're using are 1.5 inch decking screws, 2.5 decking screws, and 3.5 decking screws. And the main structure is getting put together with 3.5 inch decking screws, where a side will be getting screwed into a piece of end grain. So there's no worry about that screw coming out the other side. You want to check all of the sides of your boards, and you want to put the best side out when you're making these frames. So you just check, make sure there's no splits or cracks, or maybe if the coloring is a little off, you can put the best looking side to the outside, and it just makes a better finished product when it's done. Now we have to make this center support for the barrel. That's just going to help distribute the weight down to the legs and keep that middle of the barrel from sagging once you get all that dirt in there. We're just going to center the cross beam on the leg braces. Just find the middle, and we're going to pre-drill some holes and get that fastened on. Again, anywhere you have a screw going in near the end of the board, you want to pre-drill the pressure-treated lumber. It's pretty easy to crack, especially with a 3.5 inch decking screw. So a countersink bit really helps to keep that from happening. Double check the side of your board to make sure you're putting the best looking side facing out so that your planter is looking as good as possible. Now that we've finished the sub-assemblies, we can get the planter standing up on its 4 legs, ready to put the barrel in. Take your time to really line up the ends and edges when you go to pre-drill the legs for the frames, because the more even you get this, the less likely you are to have it rocking when it's on a flat deck. So when I'm assembling these legs to the frames, there's 2.5-inch screws on the inside and there's 3.5-inch screws on the outside. The reason is the outside is going into an end grain, so there's no chance of that coming through the other side. Where on the inside, where the two layers of wood equal 3 inches, if I put a 3.5 through that, it's going to stick out, but if I use a 2.5, it won't. You can see where I'm using these little spacer blocks. The skinny side of the spacer block is for the gap between the two big frames, and the wide side of the spacer block is the gap between the bottom wide frame and the barrel support frame. And it's just to keep everything parallel when I'm drilling the holes and getting it all centered up so that it looks even all the way around. Every joint on the leg gets 4 screws, so each of the top barrel frames and also the barrel support frame on the bottom is getting 4 screws. So there's 12 screws per leg per corner. Now I just have to repeat the same process on the other side. If there's any twisting or warping in your lumber, this is where it's going to get noticeable, where you have to fight a little bit to get it all squared up. But I was lucky this time. There was no real bendy boards, so it didn't take much to get that all squared up and put together the way it was supposed to be. Okay, now we can check the fit for the barrel, and fits pretty good. All we got to do is level up the edges, make sure nothing's sticking out over the top edge, and I can start to put the screws in. Now these screws are 1.5 inches, and because the barrel plastic's about 1/4 inch thick, I don't have to worry about those screws coming out the outside of my 2x6s. But I do put a pile of screws around the edges. It's just going to help that barrels support the weight of the dirt. Now that the body of the planter is done, I'm starting to cut the cedar for the top. Now the main body is pressure treated, so I don't want, if I'm growing food in this, I don't want any pressure treated chemicals to get into the soil. So if I put cedar on the top, whenever I water this or if it gets rained on, any runoff is coming off the cedar, not off the pressure treated. So now if I was just growing flowers in this thing, I could use a pressure treated top and not worry about the runoff. But just in case, I always put cedar on the top. So if I ever change my mind, I'm always able to grow food in the planter and not have to worry about any chemicals getting into it. Okay, so I've got the pieces for the top ready to go. Now I can start to assemble. Now I've got these little brick tie metal straps in the corners, and I've cut the corners off them on a 45-degree angle, and that's so that they don't stick out sharp. If somebody reaches under the planter to lift it up, I don't want them poking their fingers on it. But those brick ties are going to hold those corners together on the bottom. You're not going to see them. This is going to get flipped upside down, but it's going to squeeze the joint tight, and that way when the weather hits this wood, it's not opening a gap up in the joint. I'm using an 1.5-inch screw to screw these brick ties down to the cedar. Now the cedar is 1.5 inches thick, but because the brick tie prevents that screw from countersinking, it doesn't come out the other side. So we're still good for not having any screws poking out. Now that the brackets are on the bottom, I'm going to take a 3.5-inch decking screw, and I'm going to countersink one into each corner joint. And what that's going to do is keep the corners flush over time when the weather gets to that wood. I don't want it sticking up uneven. So the outside corners get a 3.5-inch decking screw, and then the inside corners are going to be screwed down to the main frame, so they're not going to move anywhere. Okay, so now the frame is done. We're going to put it on top of the main planter box. And this is where we can get everything lined up and squared up. There's only about 1/4 inch of overhang off of all 4 sides. So I'm just checking the edges with my fingers to see how centered up this is. So I'll center it up one way, then I'm going to come over to the end, center it up, and just get it ready so that I can get 2 screws in one end. And what that's going to let me do is, I know my top is square, and my frame may not be perfectly square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get 2 screws into the edge of my top frame, and then I'm going to use it kind of like a wrench to pull the rest of that table into square. So I'm going to get two screws into this edge here, and then you'll see that there's a little bit of an overhang on the left hand side, but there's no overhang on the right hand side of that tabletop. So what I'll do, after I get these 2 screws in, I'll go over to the other side and I'll push against the table legs. I'll push them forward and I'll pull the top backward, and I'll drive those screws in once it's all squared up. I'm going to take my knee and I'm going to push against the table leg, and I'm going to pull back on the tabletop, and now you can see that gap, that overhang is even all the way across the front there. So once I get those 2 screws in, now I know I've got my tabletop and my table legs square with each other. I put 4 screws in the long sides and I put 3 screws in the short sides, and just evenly spaced, and that will keep that thing from falling off. It's 3.5-inch screws going on there, so they're not going anywhere for a long time. The cedar is way better than pine or pressure treated to be on its flat like that. There's oils in the cedar wood naturally, so when rain sits on top of that, it doesn't get all it doesn't expand and contract the way pressure treated does. Pressure treated tends to split when it's lying flat like that. So now I'm sanding up all the corner joints, making sure all the edges are flush, and just brightening up the wood. It's got, you know, that tan from just kind of sitting out in the sun. So I'm going to get that all the little dings and marks off of it, and any dirt. And once that's sanded up, I'll drill the holes for the drainage. So for the drain holes, I'm just driving a 1/2-inch drill through the bottom. I'm going to put a row of 5 holes, and that should be enough to keep everything from getting too waterlogged. Alright, so here's the finished project. Hopefully you found the video useful, and there's going to be more projects like this on their way. So if you like this one, you can hit the notifications and be notified when more videos come up. See you next time.